Well, welcome back to my channel. Now I have another interesting thread to our American tapestry. Now the commanding general gave the order, kill everyone. The more you kill, the more you will please me. Kill everyone over 10 years old. Now this infamous order did not come from a Gestapo officer or Attila the Hun. It came from an American officer, and it was not the My Lai massacre. It was the pacification of the island of Samar. The time was 1901, and the general's name was Jacob Smith. He gave the order, but the man who carried out the order was Major Littleton Waller, United States Marine Corps. Major Waller had no choice but to act upon his order. Or did he? Now, the Battle of Ballinger, which I had covered in my last story, was a massacre comparable to Custer's fate in 1876. The slaughter was extremely upsetting to the American army, but more importantly, it was an outrage that needed to be avenged by the American people. You see, they saw it as American boys being cut down by cutthroat savages when all they were doing was trying to bring Christianity to a heathen people. So the story went. Now, in reality, the situation was a lot more complicated. Okay, General Lukban had continued the fight for Samar long after Aguinaldo had given up the fight. As far as he was concerned, the fight would continue until the Filipinos were free. So, was Lukban wrong? Well, as the saying goes, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. More importantly, was the response of the United States Army proportionate to the situation at hand? Did General Smith overreact? Well, in a word, yes. General Smith's record as far back as the Civil War was one of dubious distinction. Now, he was involved in a recruitment scandal. It seems Smith would induce men from the Midwest to come east and recruit them for service on the side of the Union recruits. Now, in the Midwest, they were only paying a bounty of $300. Recruits in the East were being paid $700. So Smith would pocket the difference of $400. Okay, it was shady, but it really wasn't illegal. He did run afoul when he took $92,000 from the recruiting fund and invested it for personal gains. Smith was brought into his father-in-law's bankruptcy case in 1869. Now, when the whole bounty scheme was exposed, by the end of the case, Smith had just barely managed to salvage his career. So Smith was no stranger to shady deals. I mean, he once refused to pay a gambling debt for like $2. He sent a letter to his commanding officer insulting him. How this guy ever managed to stay in the army is beyond me. Now, to say his character was less than stellar was an understatement of major proportions. By the time the war in the Philippines started, Smith had been promoted to colonel. Now, it was a practice of the time to promote a regular army officer from colonel to brigadier general just before their mandatory retirement age of 62. Now, Smith had a few more years to go, but the governor of the Philippines, William Howard Taft, promoted Smith to the rank of general, thinking he would retire. Jacob Smith had other ideas. Now, while still a colonel, Smith was quoted in the New York Times on how he believed the Philippine rebels should be treated. He said, because the natives were worse than fighting Indians, he had already adopted an appropriate tactic that he had learned in the American frontier fighting Native Americans. Now, Smith called the native Filipinos savages, and as far as he was concerned, he didn't need orders from higher command to deal with the situation. Smith did not care about the benevolent assimilation aspect of taking over the Philippines. he would have been fine with wiping out the whole population of the Philippines. There were quite a few officers, unfortunately, who believed as Smith did, as well as many members of the press and the public. Now, once the news reached America about the massacre at Balangea, the gloves came off. Major General Adnan R. Chaffee, military governor of the Philippines, received orders from President Theodore Roosevelt to pacify Samar. Now, the man Chaffee gave the job to was none other than General Jacob Smith. To put this into perspective, the My Lai massacre in Vietnam was perpetrated by a lieutenant. Now, in the hierarchy of command, a lieutenant only knows what he has been ordered to do, what objective to take, whereas a general officer understands the overall objective. Now, I'm not excusing what Calley did in 1968 Vietnam. It was murder, and the Army cover-up was inexcusable. However, Smith's reaction was that of a psychopath. So how did he pacify Samar? Well, you're not going to believe it. Smith gave the following order, and I quote, "I want no prisoners. I wish you to kill and burn. The more you kill and burn, the better it will please me. The interior of Samar must be made a howling wilderness. Any persons who are capable of bearing arms and in actual hostilities against the United States were to be killed." Smith then put the age limit at 10 years old. Now, to say Smith had issues with the Filipino people is an understatement. The man was a psychopath who used the army to satisfy his bloodlust for revenge. Okay, so one of the men responsible for carrying out these orders was Major Littleton Waller, United States Marine Corps. Waller was a career Marine who found himself in a difficult position. On the one hand, he had a direct order from a superior officer which he could not disobey. But on the other hand, Smith gave an order which he believed was over the top, illegal, and immoral. So what did Waller do? Well, he ignored Smith's orders. He told his officers to use their discretion when dealing with the native population. December 8, 1902, Major Waller, Captain Porter Bears, 3 lieutenants, and 50 Marines left Lalang for their trek across the southern tip of Samar. Major Waller would also take along 33 native porters. General Smith wanted Waller to survey a route across the southern tip of Samar to set up a telegraph wire. Waller started the trip by boat. However, the boats quickly became impracticable when the rapids at Lagatow became impassable. Major Waller was forced to continue the expedition on foot. The Marines found themselves crossing and recrossing overflowing rivers as well as traversing hazardous rapids. Now, the going was slow and arduous. Waller was forced to reduce his men's rations. By the end of the first week, Waller's Marines were in bad shape. Their clothes were rotting off their bodies. Their shoes were rotting away, causing swollen and bloody feet. The worst part of the expedition was that they had lost the trail. Waller had no choice. His men were starving, growing weaker by the hour. He had to leave all but 13 of his men behind. Now, it is a well-known fact that Marines do not leave their buddies behind, dead or alive. Major Waller lived up to that tradition. Taking 14 of the healthiest Marines, Waller made for the base camp. His instructions to Captain Porter were to follow along slowly. He would send back a relief party. Now, from December 15th until January 6th, Waller and his 14 men fought the jungle of southern Samar. Now, on the Kadakan River, Naval Captain Dunlap had ordered his men to set up a camp and wait for Waller's arrival. Major Waller and his men boarded Captain Dunlap's cutter and set off for Base C, where they arrived on June 6, 1902. Now, Major Waller wrote about his men, quote, "The men, realizing that all was over and that they were safe and once more near home, gave up. Some quietly wept. Others laughed hysterically. Most of them had no shoes, cut, torn, bruised, and dilapidated. They had marched without murmur for 29 days, end quote. Major Waller immediately led a relief party to locate Porter's party. After 9 days, the members of the relief party began to break down, forcing their return to basic. By this point, Major Waller had been out in the jungle for close to a month. Now, it had taken a toll on him, physically and mentally. But in the meantime, Captain Porter had made the choice of getting his men out of the jungle. Porter took 7 of the healthiest men, remember, healthy is a relative term by this point, and decided to retrace a trail to Lananga. He would also send out a relief party for Lieutenant Williams and the men left behind. This turned out to be more of an ordeal than the original trek into the jungle. Lieutenant Williams decided the chance of a relief party getting to his men in time was slim to none. With no other choice, Lieutenant Williams and his men struck out to find Langana. One by one, Marines were left to die along the trail. One Marine went insane and ran off into the jungle. The worst part came when Williams realized the native porters were hiding food from the Marines. The natives also attacked Williams and his men. The Marines had to fend off their attackers with sticks at one point. Now, Porter and his men reached Lanang on January 11th. Williams and his men found the relief column on January 18th and were also brought back to Lanang. Now, Williams had reported to Major Waller the actions of the porters. Quote, that the mutinous behavior of the natives left the Marines in daily fear of their lives. The porters were hiding food and supplies from the Marines and keeping themselves nourished from the jungle while the Marines starved, end quote. The 11 porters were placed under arrest. Major Waller ordered an immediate investigation into the porters' actions. Now, Waller found that the porters had acted in a mutinous manner and had hid food from the Marines. He ordered the summary execution of the native Filipinos. There was no trial. In the regular course of his duties, Waller reported the facts of the case to his superior officer, which happened to be General Jacob Smith. Yes, the very same kill everyone over 10 years old General Smith. Now, in Waller's defense, you have to remember, he was out of his mind and physically exhausted after being in the jungle for over 30 days. Trying to take care of his men and get them the hell out of there. So, yes, what happened with those native porters was wrong, but extenuating circumstances, as they say. Here's the problem. It's at this point things go sideways for Waller. General Smith decided to pull a CYA, cover your assets, so to speak. So he sent the report up the chain of command to General Adnan Chafee. Chafee, in turn, ordered an investigation into the execution of the 11 porters, native porters. As expected, charges were brought against Major Waller and Lieutenant Day for the murder of 11 native porters. On the first day of the court-martial, Waller's defense attorney tried to use a technicality to have the case dismissed. Before the enactment of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the Army had no jurisdiction over naval and marine personnel in a court-martial. That technicality was quickly overcome. You see, these two officers were going to trial. Now, Waller initially refused to mention the orders given to him by General Smith to kill everyone. However, the prosecution decided to call General Jacob Smith as a rebuttal witness. This move opened up General Smith to cross-examination. Now, when cross-examined by the defense counsel, Smith denied ever giving any such order to kill everyone over 10 years old. The door had been opened now. Smith was trapped. The defense counsel called 3 officers who corroborated Waller's version of his conversation with General Smith. They were even able to produce the written order they had received from General Smith. So, Waller's recalled to the stand. He has no choice but to inform the court that he had been ordered to take no prisoners and to kill every male Filipino over the age of 10 by General Jacob Smith. Now, attempts were made to explain away Smith's orders as hyperbole, but it was too late. The damage had been done. It was now an accepted fact that General Smith gave the order to take no prisoners and kill every male Filipino over the age of 10. The court-martial board voted 11-2 for acquittal of Waller. Later, the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General dismissed the entire case, agreeing that a Marine Corps officer was not subject to an Army court. However, Secretary of War Elihu Root ordered an immediate investigation into the kill-all order. General Smith was ordered to stand for a court-martial on April 23, 1902, for issuing that barbaric order to kill everyone over the age of 10 on Samar. However, he was not on trial for murder. Smith was facing the charge of conduct to prejudice of good order and military discipline. Witnesses were called on Smith's behalf, who stated under oath that Smith didn't really mean to order the killing of every male over 10. Smith had a tendency to be hyperbolic when issuing orders, and his subordinates understood that. Well, the court thought otherwise. May 4th, 1902, the court had concluded and submitted its verdict. Smith was found guilty of the charge and sentenced him to be admonished by the reviewing authority. Now, in this case, the reviewing authority was President Theodore Roosevelt. So, it is true that Roosevelt sent the orders for the U.S. Army to pacify Samar. He left the way it was to be done to his military generals. The problem is, General Smith should never have been put in charge of this operation. His past record indicated his lack of qualifications for the job at hand. Granted, the Army was full of enlisted men and officers who felt the same way as Smith did, but an officer's duty, especially a general officer, was and still is restraint, to restrain their men from excesses. Smith crossed that line when he gave this order. I want no prisoners. I wish you to kill and burn. The more you kill and burn, the better it will please me. I want all persons killed who are capable of bearing arms in actual hostilities against the United States. So Roosevelt was in a bind. He could not let the world believe that the United States of America would support such an order. However, many citizens thought Smith was a hero for what he had done. The Philippine War was becoming a problem. U.S. troops were committing atrocities, especially with the use of the water cure. Now, this was a technique used by U.S. troops, which is similar to waterboarding and has the same physical effects on the torturee. Roosevelt had to disavow Smith's actions publicly and send a message to his generals that this type of behavior was unacceptable. So the court-martial found that General Smith committed the act of conduct to prejudice of good order and military discipline, and he had disgraced the military. Luckily for General Smith, he had reached the mandatory retirement age of 62. Now, Roosevelt was able to get rid of Smith without having him dishonorably discharged, which would have caused many in the military, as well as many politicians who agreed with Smith's actions, to become extremely hostile to the Roosevelt administration. Now, what Roosevelt did was interesting and brilliant. So, he retired Smith, but in such a way that Smith was declared useless. In the last paragraph of his official confirmation of the court-martial, Roosevelt wrote, quote, "Taken in full, his work has been such as to reflect credit upon the American Army and therefore upon the nation, and it is deeply to be regretted that he should have acted in this manner as to interfere with his future usefulness in the Army. I therefore direct that he be retired from active service." Now, Roosevelt sent Smith packing and telling the American public he was no longer useful. To tell a general they're no longer useful is basically to say, you're expendable. Now, Roosevelt was also sending a message to the Army. He would not tolerate this type of action again. Well, I hope you liked this video. If so, it would be great if you could subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. But most importantly, leave a comment below. It's all about the whole algorithm. Anyways, thank you for watching.